time, I was the only one of the few in my program that had a science background, that knew about research, that knew about Excel and like analyzing data in that way. So I used that to my advantage when I was applying for business jobs back then,
Okay. All right. Thank you, Camille. So right now, the first question that I wanted to ask you, or I guess comment on, is because I was going through your LinkedIn and I noticed that is this a double major that you did at the University of Arizona?
I was a double major, yes.
Okay, yeah, because it looks like you studied neuroscience, but you also went into molecular biology as well.
Right.
And then after that, you went straight into studying healthcare administration for your master's. So I think my first question is, why did you decide to go the health administration route?
Yeah, great question. I think that my trajectory is a little bit unique, but I will speak to it. In undergrad, like you said, I was a double major. I was STEM majors, both in neuroscience and molecular biology. I just always had an interest in the sciences. And so for a long time, I thought that meant like I would be pre-med and try to become a physician one day. So that was kind of what encompassed a lot of my time in undergrad. And as I was nearing like my junior, senior year, I started kind of thinking beyond. I felt like because I was so busy pursuing like a pre-med extracurriculars and things associated with that, I didn't really have a lot of time to like take a step back and think about what else I was interested in. So with that, my senior year, I started kind of looking at what master's degrees I could get that were kind of related to the field. And they would kind of give me more time to decide, but still broaden my experience. By that, I mean, like, if the ideal situation for me was that I would pursue a degree that would, give me new experiences, new skills, new knowledge. But also if I still wanted to go to medical school at the end of the day, it would be, a way to kind of like bolster my application. So something that was kind of like hitting two birds with one stone. So that's what led me down the route of looking at the MPH, or the Master of Public Health, and diving deeper into that, I discovered health administration, and that just seemed like something that spoke to me. I always have been interested in, business. I really enjoy collaborating with other people, things like that, answering questions in teams. I enjoy doing like presentations and oral communication. So I thought, okay, this is a way for me to kind of like cater to those interests that I have. And as I said, still help me if I decided to apply to med school. So that's what led me to apply to the MHA. I applied to many different programs across the US and ultimately decided to go to USC.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's a really good school, actually. Okay, so I feel like I kind of had the same thought as well, like, because I studied biology and then I went on to study health administration. And I was also thinking, maybe I'll become a physician. And then I just started, well, actually for mine, for me, I started a business while I was in my undergrad, and that kind of made me think, maybe I'm a bit more business minded and maybe I should study more like of a business side of healthcare rather than becoming a clinician. But anyway, would you be able to give us like really the full story of your career, how you got started? Because I noticed that you had done like a variety of different internships. You started with research, I believe, internships, and then you started moving into some other very interesting and very impressive positions. And congratulations, I think last month you started a new job.
Yes,
So
I did.
You can give us a little bit of those details.
Yeah, I can walk you through that. So this kind of ties in with what I was just saying, but as when I was in undergrad, a lot of what I was doing on the side was related to wanting to go to medical school. So that's why I really hit the ground running and did a lot of research related extracurriculars. So I had the opportunity to work in 2 different labs. My junior year, I worked in a cognitive science lab. That was a lot more like data entry related, some data analysis and coding type things, and running different trials. And then my senior year, I had the opportunity to do a thesis. I was in the honors college, so I chose to do a thesis related to my neuroscience degree, and I worked in a genetics lab. That was a lot more hands-on, doing things like dissections, and things like that. So that's what I did my senior year. But I realized that I am a much more of a people person. So that's not something that I really wanted to do long term, but it was great. You know, it was a great way for me to gain exposure to science in a new way and learn how to analyze data and present it and defend my findings in front of a group of people. So I definitely think that that experience was valuable. Um, Moving past that, you know, I said that I wanted to get my master's of healthcare administration. So after I graduated in spring of 2019, that summer of 2019, I started working right away. And the reason being is that, you know, I knew I had a lot of experiences technically, but if I wanted to start my career on like the business side of healthcare, I really needed to get experience. And I knew that I didn't know what aspect of healthcare interested me the most. Because, you know, healthcare, there's so many different aspects of it. You could work in like pharma, you can work for a payer, you can work for consulting, healthcare delivery, hospital, etc. So there's so many different avenues within the industry that I wanted to kind of like narrow down. So the first thing that I did was I worked at a pharmaceutical company. I worked in project management for the research and development arm. And that was great because it involved a lot of like the science that I was comfortable with from undergrad and from the research that I had conducted, but also was a lot more of the like business type skills that I needed to build. And at the same time, I was able to learn a lot more about the details of, you know, drug and therapy development, and what goes into that. And I was able to interact with many different types of people throughout the day because that's, you know, what project managers do. So I had the opportunity to interact with subject matter experts, you know, ranging from scientists who had their PhDs to medical doctors to, you know, people that worked more with economics. So it really ranged, and I liked that. I had the opportunity to kind of like talk about science with people with many different types of like communication styles and levels of like scientific knowledge, I guess. So I kind of felt like I was kind of like pivoting hour by hour depending on the meeting, and that was a really cool opportunity. And at the end of that, I was able to essentially help develop this more like efficient standardized template for a not to not get too technical, but essentially there was a product that was being developed that was like a gene therapy, and I was able to kind of like learn all the different stages of development in general, and then come up with like a proposal for how we could make that more efficient for like future gene therapies that that company would be developing. So that was a great opportunity, and I really enjoyed my time there. However, I was still interested after that experience in exploring consulting, which would be very similar in certain ways in terms of like you're working in collaborative teams, you're working on projects, you're coming up with proposals, but you know, you're not, rather than doing it internally like I had at that pharmaceutical company, I would be doing it externally to clients. And that interested me mainly because I felt that I'd be able to work on many different types of projects with many different types of clients, which would add more variety to my day and just my work life, which seemed more interesting to me. So from there, from the pharma company, that fall, I started at USC. And at the same time, I started an internship at a boutique consulting firm in LA. And that was cool because it was a firm that was not healthcare specific. They were aware that I had an interest in healthcare and that my background was in science and healthcare. Many of their clients were in that space, but many of their clients were in other spaces too. And I was working on data analytics there, but that really helped me, I think. Takeaways here was definitely like, you know, broadening my experience with data analytics and presenting data, but also working with PowerPoint slides, just making something really clean, you know, as a deliverable to be able to like give to a client, something that they could like digest right away, high impact deliverables, etc. So that was very cool. And I did that position for about a year. And I think that for me, that experience solidified that I wanted to do consulting post my master's degree. However, similar to what you mentioned, is part of the requirement for your students is to get some kind of a experiential, learning opportunity. We had to do something like that as well. In our program, it was called residency, and it was like a 1,000 hour internship, basically, where you work at some kind of a healthcare organization. But because we were a healthcare administration program, most of the places that the school was associated with or affiliated with for these kind of like matching programs were like traditional healthcare delivery, meaning like not really consulting firms necessarily, not biotech, pharma, payer. Most of the things that they were affiliated with were like regional in the LA area and were like medical groups, hospitals, things like that. So I decided to end my internship at the consulting firm because I needed to do something that was healthcare specific to fulfill my requirement. But regardless, I thought, hey, it's something that I still haven't explored. Like, who knows how this might go? Maybe I'll end up loving it. So I was open to it anyways. So I worked my last year for pretty much 12 months, about a year, at a large medical group in Southern California. They actually have a national presence, but I worked for the Southern California market. And this was another world for me as well because I worked in operations, and I worked for the department that was basically focused on like population health and data analytics. So just thinking about like patient outcomes as a whole, thinking about social determinants of health, thinking about other things besides just clinical aspects that, impact, patients' quality of life and yeah, basically. So I really enjoyed that. I think that the people at this company were some of the kindest that I'd interacted with just because they were clearly so passionate about like, the patient journey. They're very mission driven. I worked in this role with quite a few like frontliners. So I worked with a lot of nurses, doctors, and so on and so forth. So I really enjoyed that. But again, I think through this, I realized that I wanted to return to consulting. But I didn't want to do generalist consulting as I did in my internship. I wanted to do consulting that was industry specific. So that brings me to the position I'm in today, which is specific to what's called life sciences industry, which is, we are recommending things to clients that are pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies, startups, everything that's in that space about like developing medicines and therapies and, technology for patients. But I will note that there are other companies like that are consulting firms for healthcare, but they do other types of healthcare. So they could be like traditional healthcare delivery. They could be saying, hey, client, here's how you can go about acquiring this like tiny hospital in your town. Or another company like Mercer is a big one that might advise people on like health and benefits. So that's a different arm. That's more like human resources, but it's still healthcare related. But mine is life sciences, and that's because it involves a lot of the science that I spoke to before. I wanted to bring that back into my day-to-day work life. So now I'm pretty much like 50% in the science, 50% in business strategy.
Well, since you're working for a company and you're in position, you kind of have like, like as you said, 50-50.
Yeah.
So is that more of like definitely a requirement for your specific position? Or would this be something that, maybe someone who just got their MHA and who maybe had like a BHA, instead of a life science degree as a bachelor's or anything?
Are you talking about like my specific position at this company?
More specific about what you have. Would they have had to have that kind of prerequisite? Or
yeah, that's a great question. I will say that it varies upon the firm. My firm, it's pretty standard at this time to have some kind of, life sciences undergraduate background. So most people have science knowledge, and majored in things like biology,
Yeah.
molecular bio in my case, and so on. Biomedical engineering is another example. But I believe there are a handful of people that have a public health undergraduate background. So that is pretty much like kind of in the same vein as healthcare administration. And we have a lot of people too that did like a double major with business and something like life sciences related, which is, you know, essentially what healthcare administration is. It is at that intersection of public health and business. So I think I think it's possible. I think there would have to be probably some networking involved to kind of just, you know, make sure that people at the firm are aware of like your value proposition, you know? But
Okay.
I think that it's definitely possible. And I think that there are some companies, like an example would be Deloitte. They have a really big healthcare / life sciences practice in their company. And I don't think that at Deloitte you need a background that is in science, because they're, you know, despite the fact that they have clients in healthcare, they're not necessarily advising clients on like down to the science. They're more doing it from a business perspective. So I think that at a company like that, they, you know, major doesn't matter as much.
Okay. What do you think like were your actual stepping stones to getting to where you are today? I mean, I know we kind of touched on that throughout your whole story, but I mean,
Yeah.
have you, I don't know. Sometimes I come across people who have taken advantage of like competitions, a lot of
Hmm.
conferences, presentations, things like that, you know, that really kind of like boost up your resume, or were you ever
Yeah,
doing anything like that?
that's a good question. So you're okay. I think that it depends on the person, obviously, as with any question. But for me specifically, I, when I was in undergrad, and I mean, sorry, when I was in my master's program for the MHA, I was I was always just leveraging what was a differentiator for me. So at that time, I was the only one of the few in my program that had a science background, that knew about research, that knew about, you know, Excel and like analyzing data in that way. So I used that to my advantage when I was applying for business jobs back then, you know. Now, yeah, I would say so. And then I would also say that the other thing that I would usually leverage was just any kind of like technical experience. So that meant that analyzing data in Excel, analyzing, there are other platforms, you know, knowing things like MATLAB, Python, R, Stata, those are all getting in statistical analyses, but those are things that even if for like that position I was applying for, it wasn't necessarily like super relevant, it's
Mm.
just something to say that like, hey, I have this like solid skill in XYZ and maybe my peers do not. So, and you know, being able to
Would you
say
suggest
like, and this is why.
or sorry, would you suggest maybe like some people taking like certifications or courses just to
Uh-huh.
just
Yeah,
have that
that's a good question.
skill so that they can show off?
Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, I would say that the first most important thing to have knowledge of is Excel, just because I think that it's the most consistently used across like organizations. So that doesn't mean I think that, you know, there's free resources on YouTube, which are great. But you can also, if you're willing to pay like $12 or $13, there's a site called Udemy that I've come to really like. And it has, you can just, a lot of the time it's on sale. You can basically purchase like an intermediate or advanced course or boot camp for Excel, and it'll teach you, it'll even give you like exercises to follow along, and you can download like certain types of, you know, data sets, and it'll help you learn how to manipulate the data and say, okay, here's what you should have come up with after doing that exercise. So it's great because it's really hands-on. And you might even be able to find a course that's specific to healthcare, and in that way it would be even better because you could work with pretend patient data, and you could show up to an interview or a networking coffee chat, whatever, and be like, yeah, I know how to analyze patient data in like these specific ways. And a lot of those courses too, I think they even have it on LinkedIn Learning, but at the end of the day, you would get some kind of certificate from that course that you could put on your LinkedIn. So that would be great. And you would be able to put in your skills, like, I know VLOOKUP, I know index match. These are things that like are keywords that a lot of these recruiters will be looking up. Hey, who knows, who has a master's or who has a healthcare administration bachelor's and knows VLOOKUP and index match, and you would pop up. So I think that's really important. I think if you're really interested in data analysis specifically, that I would recommend getting like a certification in something like Tableau or Power BI. Power BI is very similar to Tableau, and it's like newer, but it's basically just like a Microsoft platform that's similar. I would recommend those. If you want to get into the coding, back in my operations position, I did a lot of coding with SQL. And that's just a way to basically analyze something as you would in Excel, but just a lot faster and more efficiently, to be able to filter out many different patient characteristics to come down to this like population of interest. So SQL is great for that reason. It's not too hard to learn. And they also have courses like that on Udemy that I took. So love that. And last but not least, I will say that the one that was talked about a lot in my program and that I've seen is like a Lean Six Sigma certification. So that's if you want to do consulting, or maybe if you want to do like more of operations, and that's great, because that's like the Excel things and like the technical things I said, it's like, even if you decide you don't want to do healthcare at the end of the day, like all of those certifications will look great on your resume, like regardless of your industry. So the Lean Six Sigma certification, it is more expensive, so that's should be taken into account. But there's different like levels you can get. Like I think that there's like a green belt, and then the black belt is like the highest level. And that's just basically learning how you can like make things like leaner and like more efficient for organizations. And that's what a lot of, like, as you might imagine, like healthcare organizations are like looking for. And consulting firms apply a lot of those principles to their client projects to help their clients become more efficient.
That's really good advice. Actually, I'm a believer in Udemy. I also teach in a lot of those other ones as well. I actually use that.
Awesome. Yeah, I love those resources.
I know, they're great. Anyway, okay, I also was hoping maybe you can kind of like talk us through sort of like a day in the life of your current position.
Sure.
Kind of like what you do, and just give people an idea of like what you kind of do on a daily basis.
Okay, sure, I can do that. So I will add a disclaimer here that I am, I started my position about a month ago, so things might not be representative now of how it will be in the long term. Yeah, my role is very collaborative. I work in a team. Currently, I'm in a team of 6 total, including myself. And then we have someone above us who acts as the leader/manager of our team, called a PL, or project liaison. And that person is the person who is in charge of kind of like facilitating everything that's going on, and mainly the one that interfaces with the client and communicates with us down. So on a typical day, we will all log in, just all of us separate from our PL. We will just sync on what is going on for the day, what are our action items, do we need to divvy it up amongst ourselves, or can I kind of divide and conquer, or are we just going to kind of like do everything live on Zoom and try to just tackle something as a group. So something that we had to do, I guess I could give an example too of like what we were doing. So we are working for a client that wants to know what disease they should pursue from a strategic perspective in like the gastroenterology space. So they already they already have a presence in that space. They already have products in that space, but they want to know, we already have space products for these diseases. What disease should we do next? So our team worked together to conduct a ton of research. Basically, I spent the whole day coming up with every single possible disease that falls under that gastroenterology umbrella. And then we worked together at a meeting in the afternoon after coming up with that giant list. We came up with, we met in the afternoon to kind of think of, okay, what are the client's priorities here? What are some like filtering criteria that we could apply to kind of like funnel it down further, narrow it down to a like core group that we can really like dive deep into further, research more types of things like pricing and market access considerations, unmet need considerations, like do patients actually need a product in this space, things like that, just taking into account all the different factors that might make something, you know, better strategically for the client. And so that's kind of what we came up with. And then at the end of the day, we met with our project liaison. We kind of updated her on what our methodology was for filtering down. She gave us some advice on some, you know, some tips on maybe you should think about this, maybe you should actually not consider that, just kind of like, you know, revising that criteria that we had come up with. And then we kind of just put together a summary of what we did today. And tomorrow we're going to move further and, you know, continue funneling down those diseases.
That actually sounds like a lot of fun, to be honest.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
awesome. It's, you know, constantly learning for sure.
yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun, figuring things out and really narrowing things down to like the right thing. I like that.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so lastly, what I just wanted to know is if you might have any other advice for undergraduates or graduate students who are studying healthcare administration.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of things were popping into my head when you were telling me about the background of this earlier. But I think that it's definitely in your best interest to get as much exposure as possible. Not just, you know, sure, volunteering is great. Going to a conference is great, but I don't think at this time, to me, I don't think that going to a conference would necessarily like stand out on your resume as much. I think that spending some extra time doing a course online at home, like if you can't get out of your house, if you can't get a full position, at least do something at home to like build your skills in some way, right? And then and networking, you know, that's a great way to do something. You can network in order to maybe, especially now that like the virtual world is so we're more comfortable with working from home, that's something that you could absolutely use to your advantage and see like message people and see if they need extra help, you know, just some part-time, like a couple hours a week, helping them with this or that, or just having conversations with them, just because I think that say you're limited with the amount of time you have, say you have like one summer left before graduation, you really want to know like how do I prioritize my time, having those networking conversations is great because you can ask questions that'll help you filter down like or like rule out jobs or like career types that or organization types that you aren't interested in, you know? So you don't have to waste your time like working at every single type of company. You can just like talk to all these different types of people, have a little spreadsheet and be like, okay, that was a nice conversation, but no, you know? Or you could even use it to be like, talk to someone and say, hey, well, I'm interested in these things. Do you know someone in your company that has a role that pertains to those interests of mine? And they can lead you to someone else and that'll lead you down that avenue. So I think like just being strategic about how you come to that decision of like what you might be interested in and narrowing it down to like 3 to 5 possibilities will help you during your junior and senior year, because then you'll know what kinds of internships slash you know, full-time jobs to apply to. But I definitely think that like when you're doing the requirement for school, it's, you know, for me, I had that requirement through school and a lot of people felt that, you know, the affiliations from the school weren't enough and that they needed, it wasn't fulfilling like their interests. So they went outside of what was the school relationships and they made their own opportunities. They like contacted people and said, hey, I need to do this like residency for my program. Like, is this something that like we could work something out and I can work for you and I can use that as my requirement? So kind of just like being strategic about that, I think is important. And you want to know, like, you want to interview people too, because yes, you're working for them maybe for free as an internship, but you want to know like what the possibility is that you could get an offer at the end. Like there needs to be some kind of like potential opportunity there. And that's something that you should be looking for as you're, you know, applying for internships in your junior and senior year. But definitely take advantage of that. And if you really have the time, really try hard to get more than one experience, because there are a lot of people out there that are, you know, vying for jobs, as you know. So getting many different types of experiences, even if it's all at a hospital, but you have an opportunity to like work in operations, and you have the opportunity to work in business development, and also, I don't know, whatever other finance, you know, just kind of bouncing around and broadening that exposure is just going to be really, really vital. And you can do it all in your senior year if you really had to.
Right. That is
Yeah.
excellent. Really. That's perfect. Okay, thank you so much, Camille. This has been a pleasure.
Totally. Yes.
I think that you have brought so much value to this conversation. So
Thank
it's
you. Only through my own trial and error. But thanks for reaching out. I enjoyed talking about this.
I'm glad that we could have this discussion. Okay, well, you take care.
Bye. Have a good one.
Bye.